Hello, friends. You're back with episode 137 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. My name is Eric Nance, and you have tuned in to the weekly show where we are able to highlight some of the greatest resources and stories that we see on this week's Our Weekly issue at ourweekly.org. My name is Eric Nance, and it is my pleasure to be talking with all of you today. And I am joined at the hip, as usual, by my co-host, who's just as frantically preparing for a certain workshop as I am, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
Doing great, Eric. Can't be more excited. We were less than 7 days away from PositConf. It'll be my first in-person RStudio/PositConf, and super excited to be putting on this workshop for quite a few folks at this point. We have some exciting TAs, I think, that are going to be in the room with us. So I couldn't be more thrilled and looking forward to the weekend.
As we were remarking in the pre-show, it's getting real now and real fast, right? And we just got note of, it was about a week ago, of the TAs that are joining us, and it is a pretty nice list, if I dare say so myself. I'm sure we'll be talking much more about this after when we get back together. And there is one programming note to mention, but since Mike and I will literally be at the conference for early next week, there will not be an Our Weekly episode next week, but we will be back the week after, which I'm sure a lot of stories to tell in the mix of the usual Our Weekly fun that we banter on here. But speaking of Our Weekly, we are here to talk about our latest issue for week 37 that has been curated by Jonathan Carroll, a longtime contributor to the Our Weekly project. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like you all around the world. And yes, we're going to hit it heavy, so to speak, in our first highlight here, because we have another early adopter in the WebR world who has entered the fray, and it is none other than last week's Our Weekly curator and Golem architect Colin Fay. And today we are discussing the third in his series of blog posts on bootstrapping a WebR-powered app integrated with an Express.js API. Now, of course, this is not the first time you heard about WebR on this very podcast, but Colin takes a unique approach to this, and I really encourage you to not just read the post we're talking about today, but also the previous two posts. They set the stage quite nicely, where he has built a streamlined replication of you might call the Hello World of Shiny, the famous Old Faithful Geyser app that you see in countless tutorials and Hello World examples. Now, in those previous posts and those explorations, he only used the base R installation of packages. Technically, he didn't even use Shiny itself. He just replicated the data and then used a JavaScript library to actually plot the histogram. Now, naturally, that's fine. But like any R user, we want to tap into the vast community of R packages that are out there that are now available for WebR itself, which, as of this recording, is now over 18,000 of the packages are now available for WebR. That is a monumental achievement in and of itself, which we highlighted a couple of weeks ago with George Stagg's blog post in the highlight. Now, out of the box, the JavaScript object that WebR helps you create will handle the package installation. But you could say it's a little forgetful. Kind of like how you forget where you put your keys sometimes. Well, guess what? Every time you boot up a WebR-powered app, it doesn't remember you going to it before in terms of package installation, and hence it actually has to reinstall any additional package that's not included in the base core R distribution that WebR is interfacing with. Now, you know me. I can, just like Colin, see that there's a lot of opportunities for more efficiency here. So what can we do to make that more efficient, as well as potentially offer the ability to run these web apps in environments where maybe there isn't a connection to the outside internet? You know, things like that are definitely key in mind of myself, as I'll get to in a little bit. Well, Colin notes that the way that R manages packages is not exactly intuitive. And in fact, it sounds like he's got a lot of epic rants that are ready at the taking on that, which I'd love to hear more about him about. Maybe he needs to be a third-time guest on a dev series to make that happen. But I digress. He does take inspiration, even with those caveats, from R's built-in install.packages function alongside WebR's own version of installing packages to basically bootstrap his own script to help download and install the packages in a directory structure that will be compatible with WebR. And that script that I just talked about is actually written entirely in R. And it's, of course, inside the blog post that Colin wrote here. But there's still a very important next step, right? We need to take the contents of the downloaded packages and send them to the WebR library and, by proxy, the WebR file system. Now, in a true sign of the times, Colin did what many modern devs are doing. He got a little help from ChatGPT. I'm trying to find this appropriate JavaScript widget or JavaScript code to basically parse this directory tree. And sounds like it took a few different prompts, which again, I feel seen. That definitely happens for me too. It's not always right the first time. He's a little nudging along the way, but he was able to get a robust snippet of JavaScript to parse this directory tree and then to be able to post that into the WebR file system. And sure enough, like Colin does for most of his R adventures, he actually has written a small package in NPM, or Node.js's package manager library, so that you could actually install this yourself without having to write the whole script yourself. So that's pretty darn nifty. And this is a very promising approach. Colin mentions at the end of the post there are still more ways to make this more efficient. And in fact, this is something I'm exploring personally. I mentioned it maybe once or twice on previous episodes. I am part of an R consortium sanctioned pilot to help produce a Shiny application composed of either container technology or via WebR and be able to transfer that to the regulators, or in this case, the FDA, as part of a quote-unquote mock submission process. And in our case, we do want a completely self-contained version of this WebR-powered app so that the user, the reviewer, so to speak, doesn't have to tap into any online resources to run this app locally. So we've got some work to do, but I'll have a link in the supplements of the show notes to the meeting minutes where we had a great conversation with George Stagg and Winston Chang from Posit on their advice or how we can make this happen, which I think, Colin, you might be interested in learning about this too if you're listening to this. And also have a link to Colin's issue on the WebR repo itself, where he did some initial brainstorming with George on how to make this more efficient. So I'd say definitely watch this space because it sounds like it's going to get even easier in the months to come. But yes, another promising adventure and a promising new way to kind of have the best of both worlds, be able to tap into the R community of packages and to be able to bootstrap that efficiently in your WebR-powered app. So lots of fast-moving things, but following the adventures of Colin, Bob Rudis, and many others in this space, it's definitely a fun adventure to follow for sure. So yeah, Mike, you're going to build yourself a web-powered app with, 100 packages installed?
Sounds like it's going to take a while if that's the case each time that I would want to use that app. And Colin's use case is an API here. And right, you certainly don't want to have to reinstall packages each time the API is launched. And if I'm understanding this correctly, because WebR is still fairly new to me, I haven't necessarily played around with it that much. When he says reinstalling packages each time the API is launched, that essentially means each time anyone navigates to that URL, right? Because it's your browser or your own PC, right, sort of becomes the server when you're using WebAssembly. Am I correct in thinking about it that way?
That's exactly right, Mike. And in fact, I tested this out because another link we have in the supplements here is what the repository website that George Stagg has put together that gives you a list of all the WebR compatible R packages, that 18,000 plus as of this recording. When you visit that app, if it's like a quote unquote new day or a new session, it is actually bootstrapping a WebR powered app in that package repo listing. And it did take a good minute or so for that to finish this morning as I was putting together the show notes. So yes, that's why I mentioned earlier, there's a kind of a forgetfulness of this process in the current state.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think the great thing about what Colin's doing, what Virla's doing, what a lot of other folks in the community are doing is everybody's sort of taking small bites out of this bigger problem of not necessarily problem, but bigger use case of how to improve WebR in terms of its performance and making WebR apps or WebR sites or utilities sort of try to perform as good, if not better. I don't know if better is possible, but as good as if you were deploying it on, a dedicated server or something like that. So, I think we are very early in the life cycle of WebR, and it's really cool to see folks, sort of in the wild west here, like Colin, keep trying to take chunks out of the problem and keep trying to make small advancements, which I think Colin made a few small advancements here that are really, really interesting to folks, like yourself, Eric, who have a use case as well for trying to potentially package things up in a WebR framework. And, Colin's, again, his use case is an API, but I imagine that this issue would similarly exist if you're authoring a Shiny app as well. I know that there were some advancements with respect to WebR in terms of its file system or connecting your own file system to a WebR app or sort of mounting storage. I don't know if that's the right way to think about it or not, but I imagine that would sort of be the place where I know that's where Colin was looking to try to sort of redundantly have packages there such that they didn't need to be reinstalled each time his API was launched. So again, it's just seeing small chunks being taken out and small holes being drilled in this overall problem of trying to continuously improve WebR, and it's super promising. It sounds like all the right folks are in the conversation. It's great to hear that George Stagg is in your conversations as well. He seems to be one of the leaders of this whole WebR project over from the Posit side. So a great blog post, and I'm always really interested to see what the latest improvements are in the WebR space.
And it was as if Colin was writing this for us too, Mike, because near the end of the post, guess what? He makes a Docker container of it all because we like to container all the things too. So that was very nifty. If you just want to try this out so quickly and you have Docker installed, boom, there. Bob's your uncle, as I say. You got your Docker container right there in the writing. So that is. I didn't even think of it that before, but I could have technically merged both of my pilot efforts into one place with the Docker setup in the WebR. Oh, it's almost like Inception almost. But anyway, there, like you said, Mike, there's lots of ideas to glean from this. And yes, I believe George is going to give a talk at PositConf. So I think I will be near the front row on that one for sure. And definitely at least shake his hand for all the help he's already given me on my pilot escapades here. But yeah, it's a fascinating space to watch.
Yes, and I can't help but thinking that there's some way that Docker could help improve the WebR performance experience. But that's a problem for folks like George, who are much smarter than I am.
You and me both, Mike. Well, one could view what Colin wrote in the previous highlight as a way for him kind of, showcasing his development journey on making these WebR-powered apps. Sometimes you need to put a little bit of extra narrative around certain pieces of it. And in this next highlight, you could think of that in a similar way, but in very much a mathematical sense. And I admit, reading this one does give me flashbacks to my dissertation writing days and some not-so-fond memories. But at the same time, this is a really nifty trick. And what we're talking about here, one of our favorite publication systems now, which is the Quarto engine, of course, and be able to put equations in the documents that we're creating. But maybe we need to, give a little nudge or a little annotation on certain parts of that equation, which obviously, if you're teaching math or statistics, this can be a big help to you. Well, our next highlight comes from Luke Pembleton, who is a genomic breeding scientist at Berenberg, and he talks about a really nifty way to take an existing LaTeX package that can be installed on the fly in your Quarto document to help annotate famous equation write-ups that you often do in LaTeX. The caveat here is that this is at this time only going to work in PDF format. So immediately I was thinking about Could I hook this up with MathJax? But it seems like not quite yet, but I'll watch that space, I guess, in the future. But it's actually a pretty straightforward process to tell Quarto that you need this additional package, which I believe is called Annotate Equations. Pretty logically named, if I dare say so myself, compared to other LaTeX packages, which have some of those cryptic names known to humankind, but rant over. But in any event, once you put that in your preamble of the YAML, which I think is called header includes, which you can declare that, then Quarto will take care of getting that package for you. And then there's a nifty mechanism where you break up your equation into different, I call it nodes. Think of it as like areas, like to the left of the equal sign. Maybe it's a summation, symbol, the superscripts and subscripts and everything like that. And then you can just simply add your annotations, which I believe is standing on the shoulders of the TIKZ, T-I-K-Z graphic library to help power where the annotations go. There is a bit of customization you can do for like if it's above or below the symbol and just how far left and right it needs to be. So as like anything in graphic kind of design, you can probably tweak this as much or as little as you need. But I can see this as a huge win if you're adopting Quarto for, authoring your teaching documentation, maybe a course syllabus or course module, and you're already in the PDF landscape anyway. This seems like a great way to supercharge that extra bit of helping hand to your students on just explaining what the heck is that summation doing. I could have really used this when I was writing my dissertation and putting these massive convergence limit theorems and all this. Oof, yeah, I'm getting the flashbacks again. But either way, this would have been nice back then. So if I really have nothing else to do, I might just go back to my dissertation and see how this works. But that's not going to be for a while, folks. Don't hold your breath. But in any event, if you are writing PDFs with Quarto and you're doing any kind of math or stat teaching, I think this is a great technique. Okay, I need a breather after those flashbacks of LaTeX, Mike. You take me home. Hopefully this was something that you think might be useful too.
As somebody who would like to think that he's pretty good at math, I have a college degree in it, but I'll be the first to admit that when I see a long equation, 99% of the time, it's not obvious to me what's going on in that equation. And I'm sure there's some folks out here who read mathematical notation like it's their second language. I am not one of them. I need to break it down piece by piece. And I'm typically very grateful for folks who, below the equation, most of the time, have a list of what each element within the equation represents, right? Like a bulleted list. And I try to do that myself for any mathematical documentation that I author. But Luke Pempleton has taken us a step further than even that. And he's provided us with a guide on how to annotate your LaTeX equations in a Quarto document. And it looks very similar to what you can do in ggplot2 with geom_annotate or geom_text or the ggRepel package, which allows you to sort of easily point with arrows and text to an element on your plot and call that out specifically. So for anyone who's used LaTeX before to author equations, you might just be used to writing out the equation on a single line from left to right in your LaTeX code. But Luke introduces this concept of splitting your equation into nodes, as you said, Eric, that allows you to instead author your left to right equation that's going to render in your PDF, but you can author it by writing LaTeX code from top to bottom, which is really, really cool. And you just have to sort of add this tag node element for each sort of piece of the equation as you author it. And within a Quarto doc, what that means is that you can use the equals text, TEX chunk header to be able to put your LaTeX equations within that code chunk, and it'll render really nicely in your PDF document. That was something I had not known yet before. I was sort of used to the double dollar signs for authoring my LaTeX equations. And as you said, you have to include it in the YAML header, the annotate equations LaTeX package. Make sure that you install that. And not only can you have an annotated arrow, maybe this will be the last thing that I point out, an arrow that points to a particular element in that equation, but you can highlight that element in a box by essentially sort of this box would have a semi-transparent background on top of the element within that equation, and it could line up, with that. The color of that box could be the same color as the arrow that's pointing to it, so it makes it very obvious which element is being called out. And again, it's sort of difficult to narrate this on a podcast. It's really something that you need to see for yourself. So I'd encourage you to check out just how visually appealing Luke has been able to make these LaTeX
good
equations.
Call out to some of the things I've done in the past with visualization with Annotate. Yeah, this is a very similar approach for LaTeX itself, and it does look fantastic. Like if I was in a very long ago past life when I was in grad school, there was one semester where I was a TA of a statistics course. Well, I would have been all over this with my slides, and if I had to do the PDF Beamer route, hey, shout out to all the Beamer veterans out there. I see ya. I hear ya. I did so many of my slides in that. This would be a great fit for it with Quarto. So great find, and glad that we can talk about this for all of you that are either consuming or producing content for teaching these very important concepts.
I have a use case for this literally today.
Often get these random notes on Twitter or social media about people seeing stuff, right? Well, a lot of people tend to think that these could be visitors from another galaxy in and of itself, and that's where our third highlight comes to play. Well, we've mentioned in previous episodes how much fun it is with the Tidy Tuesday initiative, that you can bring a lot of fun data sets to the community of data scientists out there, and they can produce some fun visualizations or statistical summaries. Well, back in 2019, one of the data sets that was released was UFO sightings that was collected by the National UFO Reporting Center. I didn't even know that existed, so I already learned something already with this, but it's a pretty fun data set. It's got some interesting attributes such as the location and latitude and longitude of the sighting, the date and timestamp of when it occurred, a description of the sighting in more of a free text format, and a few other attributes. And there's some ample opportunities for some cool descriptive summaries and visualizations, which back in 2019, a few members of the community did share on their very... But why not take it up a few notches, Mike, where instead of just doing those, basic visualizations, we could actually build a statistical model that accounts for the uncertainty in our prediction estimates and leverages a data-driven approach to get to those estimates of parameters. What does that sound like to you? You know what that sounds like to me? Bayesian models. And that's exactly where our last highlight author, Jack Kennedy, who is a data scientist at Jumping Rivers, took his analysis of this UFO sighting data, where he actually leveraged full-fledged Bayesian models written in Stan to explore these data and give us some nice, you might say, data-driven interactive explorations of it. So, Mike, I need a breather after all that math talk. Maybe you take me through what happened here in this fun model here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand why Jack used a Bayesian approach to model UFO sightings. I don't know why we would want to account for any uncertainty, because I think we're all pretty certain that UFOs exist and that aliens exist out there. That's the hot take of the day. But it's a pretty interesting time series in terms of the observations and the data that constructs this UFO sighting reports for Great Britain data set. There's very, very minimal, near zero UFO sightings up until just about the year 2000, when things spiked to a high of over 150 recorded UFO sightings per year, which is pretty interesting. And then right around 2010, it starts to come back down. So Jack had a couple interesting hypotheses about why he thinks that this might be the case. One could be, obviously, there's an increase in UFO traffic over the Earth during this time, or the emergence of the internet brought like-minded people together, improving the ease of reporting, or the 1996 blockbuster film Independence Day had some kind of effect on people reporting UFO sightings. I think all of these, maybe minus the first hypothesis, are probably quite probable. And Bayesian approaches to modeling time series data can be somewhat tricky sometimes. And Jack notes that he went through a number of different approaches, but sort of ended up, after trying a bunch of different Poisson-based models, ended up leveraging a negative binomial regression model, and used spline terms to flexibly model the nonlinear trend in the data, because it's kind of a strange time series, again, where most of the data is near zero between 1940 and 2000, and then you have this spike, this curve between 2000 and present day, when the data starts to come back down after the year 2020 to near zero again. So he leverages a combination of R and Stan. He uses R to construct the spline terms, I think, which were really important in fitting this model as closely to the data as possible, and then performs his inference using Stan, and with the help of the tidy Bayes package, which really allows us to take our output from Stan models and convert it into something that is a lot more useful from a data frame perspective, from a tidy perspective as well, in authoring these posterior summaries plots. You can take a look based upon the confidence that you're willing to go with, and see really just how close his model is to the actual data. That's sort of how the blog post wraps up. And I was pretty shocked, because of the nature of this data, how strange it is, how near zero most of the data is with just this one curve. So I was really impressed to see Jack sort of fit a model that comes as close as it does to fitting the data that he used to construct that model. So really interesting blog post here. I think it's a pretty cool, fun use case, right? Using UFO sightings data, and it's awesome always to see blog posts from the Jumping Rivers team who are always pushing the limits.
Yeah, and really towards the end of the blog post are one of the reasons that even though I'm not as proficient in Bayesian modeling as I would like, I cannot deny the fact that when you're able to capture what they call the posterior samples of these predictions and be able to account for your, in essence, confidence or credible intervals, they call it, and really get an accurate picture for those data points, how it does get quite a bit wider when you get to that spike, right? Because that is a very gnarly, hump in the curve, so to speak, compared to that relatively flat line of zero counts. In a basic model, you might get something like a basic linear fit. You're just going to get a weird line going kind of up, but not really accounting for that variation. So being able to account for that accurately, we can never be 100% accurate, but you can use a data-driven approach to at least account for how far you're off from quote-unquote the real prediction. I think that gives you a wealth of possibilities for really summarizing these different portions of the time course. And that's why, at least in my day job, Bayesian models are becoming a lot more important in how we're modeling complicated efficacy measures and the like in life sciences. So it's definitely a trend, and having this example post here is a great way to walk you through just what's possible. So I really commend Jack for writing this in a very accessible way. And Stan itself has, I would say, alleviate a lot of the hurdles that maybe somebody new to Bayesian analyses might encounter if they were using existing packages in this space, such as JAGs and whatnot. I don't have the best time with JAGs in my older days, but yeah, Stan seems to be making a lot of positive momentum in this space, and it's always fun to see just where you can unleash these models to, and what insights you can bring from it.
Absolutely. And, when you are working with a data set like this one that only has 80 data points in it, right? One for each year between 1940 and 2020, roughly, you have to be incorporating some uncertainty. This is me on my soapbox, but please leverage some Bayesian techniques. If your use case looks like this, right? That the data doesn't necessarily represent some sort of obvious trend or anything like that. Incorporate some priors that you might have about the use case that you're working on. Apply the data that you've collected to those priors and try to find a way to represent the uncertainty that you do have about how the system works. So that's me on my soapbox. I'm very glad to see that Jack took that approach, and would love to see more folks.
Yeah, every time I see something like this crop up, I have in my fancy schmancy bookmark management system a whole tag dedicated to Bayesian analyses for follow-up, and this is going right in that list as well. And you as a listener have even more follow-up to do because there's a lot more content involved in this our weekly issue that Jonathan has curated for us. So we'll take a couple minutes for our additional finds. And of course, every time I spot a post from Yihue Xia, the author of Knitter, I'm going to jump on that. And he gives us a preview of what's to come in the upcoming release of Knitter version 1.44. And there are some nice quality of life enhancements and a bug fix in respect to Quarto documents. But honestly, the other nugget in that post is that I found out in a previous post that Yihue finally took a well-deserved vacation earlier this year and was able to take a month or two off to completely disconnect. And boy, that guy deserves it. So I hope you had a great time in your vacation there, Yihue. I know, you work so hard on maintaining Knitter and the R Markdown ecosystem. So kudos to you. And looking forward to the next enhancements of Knitter.
So I found a really interesting blog post from Shannon Pileggi on her Piping Hot Data blog. And it was all about this R project sprint that she participated in, which was an in-person collaborative event to contribute to base R, which was really cool. So they took a look at, a bunch of the issues that exist in the base R code repository, and they triaged and addressed some of those issues in this project sprint. And she worked on a couple. One that she worked on was the documentation primarily for the base paste function, which was really interesting. I think documentation, particularly regarding the collapse and the recycle zero behaviors within that function. So, to me, it's amazing when folks, contribute to open source packages that are out there, and people contributing to base R is almost mind blowing to me. So I'm very, very jealous of the experience that she had. It sounds like she learned a lot, and I would love to be able to participate in something like that in the future. And the other bug that she addressed too was the t-test bug within the a bug within the t-test function of the stats package. And she tagged a few of the different issues related to that bug and talked about how they went about solving that. And she felt that it was a huge success that she can now confidently either submit a bug report or address an existing bug report within base R and really learn the nuances of how folks contribute to base R and how everything works there. So it sounds like it was an awesome experience. I thought it was a fairly unique blog post. And if you're interested in learning about how our project sprints work, learning about her experience, and potentially maybe getting involved in the future, I think this is probably a great blog post to get you started.
Yeah, and it actually brings back a callback to as you're seeing these more community-driven enhancements to base R itself, which again is a terrific way to give back to this amazing project that we're such big fans of. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. But this actually has roots over years now. But I had the pleasure in my ironically last recorded episodes for the time being of my main R podcast. I was able to sit down with Heather Turner and Saranjit Kaur Bogo about the initiative of driving the community enhancements and enriching this next generation of R core development. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But it's nice to see the seeds that were planted back in 2022 and earlier really take to fruition through these sprints. And Shannon, a great write-up as always, and I believe I'll be seeing her at the PositConf next week. So hopefully so, and I'll get a chance to say hi even more.
Yes, it looks like a lot of folks that we know were participants in that 2023 R project sprint. I see George Stagg's name on there, and I see a lot of other familiar names, folks that we've talked about today and on previous episodes as well. So I definitely have some jealousy and some imposter syndrome. It sounds like that must have been a really, really amazing learning opportunity.
Yeah, and honestly, I call my R bucket list, if you will, I will at some point get involved in one of these sprints. You can mark it here, folks. I made the declaration on September 12th, 2023, that someday Eric will be part of these sprints. So hold me accountable, folks. I definitely want to be a part of it.
It's on the record now.
Yeah, no turning back, as they say. Well, we hope you never turn back of keeping R Weekly as part of your daily, you might say, R content consumption. You know, there was so many great stories to learn from, great tutorials, great new packages. Jonathan put a huge list of packages together, and I only have skimmed through thus far, but there's a lot of great finds on there as well. But if you want to find out more, well, again, everything's at rweekly.org. And if you find a great resource, new package, blog post showcasing R in the real world setting, or a new event that you want people to know about, and much more, we are a pull request away, as they say. You can have a link to the upcoming draft right there at the top of the page. Everything's in all markdown all the time. It's very easy to get that contribution sent to us, and the weekly curator will merge that into the upcoming issue. And if you want to get a hold of us personally, your trusted co-hosts of these podcasts are available on social media. I am at our podcast at podcastindex.social. Mastodon. I'm on the other thingy at the Rcast, you know what. And also I tend to cross-post each of the episode announcements on all 3 platforms. So happy to get in touch with you on those as well. Mike, where can the listeners find you?
The best place is probably Mastodon at Mike_Thomas at fostodon.org.
And also, if you are going to have the good fortune of being in Chicago next week, come look for us. We'll be there for quite a bit of the conference, and happy to meet all the R Weekly listeners out there. And I might have some stickers to share. So hashtag just saying.
And I assume, similar to other podcast hosts in the last few years, Eric and I will be meeting in person for the first time. So that's super exciting as well.
That is right. We've been recording how many episodes together, and this is the first in reels, so to speak, meeting for us. So we're going to have lots of fun just sitting down together. And finally, first of all, me thanking you for joining me on this escapade, all these episodes in person. So that'll be lots of fun. All right, well, it's going to time to close up shop here because we got even more workshop prep to do and other fun bits of our day jobs. But we appreciate you so much for joining us on this episode. And once again, we will be off next week. But again, come find us in Chicago if you want to chat more about fun art stuff with us. But until then, we will see you back in a couple weeks. So long, everybody. Wow. How do I go from WebR to equations? Well, anyway, I'll make it work. Is using one of our new favorite publication, package. Whoa. Well, our next highlight comes from Luke Pembleton, who is a Genome.
I need a vacation.